Hello students and welcome to another awesome source-based question tutorial on the NHS SBQ. Now, many of you would have already done this as a class test, so take this opportunity to review what the answers are and what are some of the common mistakes that are made. Right, so the very first question that you're required to do is, do you think the cartoonists approve of the NHS? Explain your answer using details of the cartoon. Now, before we can even go into the cartoon, please remember that it's extremely important to go through the background information because that will give you some clues to make sense of the different sources that you will come across. Remember, it is extremely important that you read this first. So let's look at source A. Source A is a pretty easy cartoon to understand. Here we have a doctor saying, I'm going to give you something that works like aspirin but costs much more. Obviously, the cartoonist disapproves of the NHS because it has something to do with paying a lot for the aspirin. Now, many students would give the common mistake of saying that he disapproves of the NHS because the aspirins are expensive. But do remember that for most of the time, the NHS gives out free medicine. So what we're trying to look at here, in order to understand this picture, is to look at the source. Now, the NHS has been criticized for inefficiency and waste. Okay, so that part of the background information should give you a clue as to how the cartoonist is actually criticizing the NHS. Over here, I give my model answer as to what should be the correct answer. Now do take note of the one in bold because that's the main point of the answer. However, also do take note that you need to answer the question in the very first sentence. The cartoonist disapproves of the NHS. And the question was, do you think the cartoonist approved? So straight away, answer the question. Now, not spend too long on the answer. You can pause this video at any point of time and go through the answers yourself. Now, let's move on to the next question. Study source B. How useful is this source as evidence about the NHS? Explain your answer. Now, sources which are useful have to tell you something about the NHS, right? So what happens if you think that the source is unreliable or is biased? Do keep in mind that no matter how biased the source is, there will always be a part which is useful. Now, looking at source B, we have a doctor here, a senior doctor who's actually looking back at his life working in an NHS. Reading the source, we can obviously tell that he thinks that NHS is a success, okay, based on the way he describes it. Now, do take note when you look at the source, the language which is used, because that will often be a clue as to whether the source is useful or not useful. In this instance, we can see that his language is mainly positive to a point where it's praising. Okay, let's take a look at some of the words he used. Impressive healthcare, high quality staff, whole wonderful team. Now, be wary or be careful of sources which praise overly because that will give you a clue. On the surface level, it looks like, yes, it's really useful because it shows that the NHS has been a success. That will only be a portion of your answer. Let's take a look at the model answer, which is pretty short for this answer. Now, the source is useful in telling me about the NHS as it tells me that the NHS was a success. Okay, obviously you can give the evidence which actually shows that it's a success. However, this is the lowest possible level answer you could give. Okay, that means it shows that you take things at face value. In the next portion, you should tell me how it's not useful. Now, there's a nice way to do this. I encourage you to use the sentence, however, the source has its limitations, which means to say that you think it's useful, but it has some problems with it. It doesn't tell us about the NHS shortcomings or failures, and furthermore, it is challenged by source A, which shows how wasteful the NHS is. Now, notice that I only use source A. Alright? And I don't use the other sources. Now, why is this so? Remember, this is way back in 2009. This is right now in 2009. And if you want to talk about how the source was a success, and you cross-refer to the labourer, for example, it is not considered a valid comparison because of the year. 1997 and 2009 are very, very far apart. Okay, so we cannot cross-reference to sources which are too far apart in their years. Now, what happens if you cross-refer to an invalid source? Well, basically you don't get the marks for it. Moving on, I go on to examine how the doctor might be biased in his opinion. Okay. However, don't just stop by saying he's biased and expect the marker to understand how is he biased. Why is he biased? So the reason why I said he's biased because he had served as a doctor during that time. And this is where I bring in language. Now, remember when I talked about the language that he uses? Well, he uses words such as impressive care, blah, 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 blah. Now, the reason why he will be biased is he will bound to say good things to protect himself. This would make sense, right? If you work in an organization, you obviously want to tell people that, oh, it's very good. Okay, there's a good history behind it. So how do you end off such an answer? First, you say it's useful, then you say it's not useful. So how do you end off the answer without sounding like a schizophrenic? End of the answer by saying, nonetheless, the source is still useful as it tells me how the doctors feel about the NHS. Alright? The source doesn't tell you about how everyone else felt, but it does tell you how the doctor feels about the NHS. Okay? Despite the fact that it's biased, it shows how he feels about it. Okay, remember you can pause the video at any point of time to look at the answers. Now let's move on to source C. Study sources C and D. How far do you think the labourer in source C would have agreed with the cartoonist who drew source D? Explain your answer. Okay, now this is a comparison question. Okay, however, there is no need to go into detail about tone and purpose here. They are asking you about the author's opinion, okay, the labourer's opinion, what they think. So there is no need to go into tone and purpose. Unless, of course, the question is, how different are these two sources? Then feel free to go crazy, go mad, and do the necessary steps. But for this instance, no. So, having a quick look at source C and source D, okay, we see a labourer who's saying good things about the NHS and things like doctors began to smile. Overnight, the meanness and rudeness were all gone. Okay, so basically he's happy with the NHS. In source D, however, we see people lining up for the dentist. Okay, And if you read the provenance, it says, the nurse is telling the people in the queue that any more of them thinking to have free false teeth as a Christmas present means they will have to go somewhere else. Now, already we can see that some people here are leaving with their false teeth, and there's a long line of people here. Now, if you think about it, after waiting for so long, these people have to go to somewhere else, and for the nurse to tell them that they have to go somewhere else is extremely rude, right? And there is something about people getting false teeth. So, right, straight off this, we can already make notes on your source-based question paper. Take a look at source C again, and we can see something about free teeth. So it's true, it's not an exaggeration. Okay, so people did get free teeth. Okay, on the other hand, we also see a difference here. Okay, where the label in source C said that the doctors began to smile and there was no meanness or rudeness. In source D, we see the total opposite, with the nurse telling them to go away and go somewhere else. Now, all that's left is to put this into words. And here is the answer for question 3. I will not go too much into the answer, as I already explained the two sources to you already. Alright, almost there, hang on guys, and let's look at question D. Study sources E and F. Does source E make you surprised by the views expressed in source F? Explain your answer. Let's take a look at E and F. Okay. Obviously, they are two different views from two different people, okay, from two different walks of life. Now, when you look at these sources, try and look at it and try and put yourselves in the position of these people. Okay, source E is from a teacher in 2008 who talks about his father who had a heart operation done some years ago. That's a clue. I'll go back to that in a while. Blah 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 blah. Basically, he had a bad experience with private healthcare. Source F, on the other hand, is a retired banker in 2008 who's basically telling you about his good experience with private healthcare. Okay, obviously, he has a much better experience than the teacher's father. Alright, now, when a source asks you, are you surprised? Okay, remember that I told you to say, oh, you're not surprised because there are two different viewpoints. Obviously, they have two different points of view. Well, looking at the O-level comments by the markers, many of them actually suggested that people be surprised. They want people to be surprised. Surprised? Well, don't be. Imagine this scenario, okay? It's your birthday and you overheard your friends planning a birthday party, a surprise birthday party for you, okay? Now, and they are planning it at your home. So when you reach home, obviously, even though you know that you already know the surprise, when you walk in the door, you'll be like, wow, surprise! And you act all surprised when actually you know that, you had already planned it and you had heard of it. So do the same thing for me. Try and act surprised. Now, what are you supposed to be surprised about? Let's take a look at the answer. Okay, I mentioned that the source makes me surprised because source F is supporting private medicine, while on the other hand, source E is against private medicine. Okay, this comes as surprising. Please tell me why it's surprising. Because you would expect to get better healthcare in private medicine. Okay. On the other hand, these two viewpoints might not be surprising after all. Because remember I mentioned that the father had undergone treatment a few years before. Well, a few years before 2008, the private healthcare might not be as good as it was now in 2008. So, and maybe the father was unfortunate enough to experience some bad hospital healthcare. Alright? While on the other hand, the banker got a good private hospital, and therefore, not so surprising. We all have good and bad experiences, so not so surprising. Now, I mentioned about putting yourselves in the shoes. So, in source E, it was a teacher. So, comparing a teacher and a banker, obviously, the banker would be more well off and have more benefits than teachers. So, perhaps the teacher was not able to buy the best private healthcare that was around, and he got only the lousier kind of private healthcare, unlike the banker, who, because he had a lot of money, he was able to afford the best private healthcare possible. Alright? And because of this, it is not that surprising after all. Okay? Because they are from different walks of life, they had different experiences, they had different experiences which would lead them to different opinions about private healthcare. And this brings me to the end of my awesome tutorial. I try to keep it as short as possible. Do remember to keep your evidence give your evidence, and stay tuned for the next episode when I cover the next source-based question tutorial. Do leave your comments or questions in the comment section, and I'll try to respond to them as soon as I can. Alright, thanks for watching, bye!